my goal for this hour is if I can help one farmer triple their production this season, I will feel like my time was well spent this evening. All right, so let's get into it. All right, so I think you know, a lot of folks ask, you know, why grow lettuce? And I think if you're a farmer, if you're a beginning farmer, and you're wondering what crop to grow, I feel like lettuce is, I mean, I think it's like a $1.5 billion is what the U.S. spends on buying lettuce. It's easy to grow once you kind of develop your system. And it's that one crop that everybody recognizes. Americans just eat a tremendous amount of this. It grows really quick. It's really easy to harvest and pack. And in our experience, it's been fairly easy to sell. So if you're watching this and you're like, why in the world would you focus on one crop? Those are kind of a few things that I tell people. And if you're starting out and you're wondering what would be a good crop, I think you could do really well if you just focus on one crop and then you can add more once you get this down. So there's key things that I'm going to just touch on this evening, and that is soil fertility, which I do not think enough farmers are paying attention to. Weeds, the killer. Like lettuce hates weeds. Water, if you're in a hot, humid climate, you have to have water. You know, I consult with farmers who are trying to water their lettuce with buckets, and you're going to struggle if you do not have adequate water. Lettuce varieties, you cannot grow, you know, Waldman green lettuce in May, June, July, at least in our climate. But other varieties work really well. So understanding varieties, I think, is really important. So if you've tried lettuce in the past and it failed, don't think that you can't grow. Just think that maybe you were growing the wrong variety. So that's something to really pay attention to. And when to plant. You know, having a plan of when you're going to seed and plant for the 4 seasons is something that a lot of farmers miss. And it's easy to do because, you know, you're not, if you don't really understand how the growing patterns of your climate is, it's going to be easy to miss the mark. And, you know, for us, we have to have lettuce 52 weeks a year. We cannot miss a week. And we have a fairly complicated planting plan for our climate. But understanding when to plant will really help you succeed in having production week after week. And then season extension. No matter where you're at, really, season extension is going to really help you capture clients, get that consistent production. And it doesn't take much. I mean, you can spend very little. Obviously, you can spend tens of thousands of dollars, but you know, season extension is the one thing for lettuce that can be done relatively cheaply at first. And then understanding who you will sell to. That's really important. A lot of folks spend a lot of their time on the previous 6 items, but don't understand their markets, who they want to sell to, and what do those clients want. And there's lots of forms of lettuce. There's salad mix, there's SALANOVA, there's mesclun mix, there is head lettuce, and there's all the different packaging. And a kind of a short thing on the marketing, we've had grocery stores that will buy salad mix, but they would not buy head lettuce until we put it in a clamshell, and our sales just 10x'd for head lettuce to those grocery stores. So those are just a few things that is really important to understand when you're growing this one crop. So here's kind of a basic, what we really think about soil health and fertility. I'm a big believer in hiring a soil consultant. I'm not a soil scientist. Nor, I mean, I want to understand basic soil chemistry, but I'm not going to have the time to understand. I mean, there's so much to understand with soil, and I'm happy to pay a professional who has been to school, who's done the tests, read the books, has the experience, because hiring a soil consultant is probably one of the best things that I've ever done for my whole farm. We do mineral packs, we do a lot of compost, we do crop rotations. We don't do as much cover crops as we used to. Understanding what fertilizer you need, fish emulsion it's more like a Band-Aid, but it's something, if you didn't get your mineral packs right, you might be able to get away with that at first. And the weed control. This is something that we failed miserably on for really the first 5 or 6 years of farming. We could never get our weeds under control. We're on the edge of like zone 7 and zone 8, and the heat and the humidity is just brutal. And we just never could never get to it. I mean, it's one of those things where you see a little seedling and you're like, you know what, I don't have time, I'll get into it tomorrow, and then something else happens. Before you know it, you have this. And unfortunately, this was the norm for us. We tried plastic with the tractor, but then our paths, the weeds would grow up to your knee, and then you're harvesting in the morning and you're soaked, and it was just terrible. And we could never grow a good quality crop like this. So once we understood, started implementing things like tarps, cultivating on time, using things like landscape fabric, we went from this to the next year, we went to this. And really understanding, your climate. If you're up north, maybe you don't have to cultivate so much. For us, if we're on bare soil, we have to cultivate twice a week. There's just no way around it. The heat and the humidity, the weeds just grow so fast. We've had plots that have not gone to seed in 5-6 years, and we still have to cultivate twice a week. So oftentimes, especially like in May, when the season drastically shifts and the weed seed bank for the summer comes to life, sometimes we'll use landscape fabric. The thing about landscape fabric is it is fairly costly. I think in 2016 we spent about $2,000 in fabric. I was the only full-time employee. We just had part-time. We just made a huge shift in our farm, and I did not want to weed. And I think in 2016 I cultivated our main crops for about 10 hours that whole season. It is a hassle to move around, so it's not perfect. But if you do not have your weed bank under control, this is a pretty incredible method. So for SALANOVA, which I'm going to talk mainly about tonight, is really kind of focused on SALANOVA. This template is basically 6 inches apart, and it's 8 inches from row to row. And this is for a 30-inch bed. And all of our beds, just for context, is 30 inches wide by 100 feet long. And so SALANOVA grows really well in this. We'll kind of get into paper pot next. And just very simple. You put that wooden template on the fabric, burn the holes, and it really goes really, really quickly. And we're covering everything. Like when we do fabric, we do not want to spend any time weeding. We do a lot of landscape fabric, mainly in the early spring, right into the middle, kind of the first month of summer. And the reason being is because oftentimes we're using row cover, or spring tends to be pretty busy for us, and there's a lot more rain, and it's a lot more difficult for us to get in and cultivate. And then once it gets warmer and drier, then we'll switch to the paper pot. So here's another great benefit of doing landscape fabric, especially for like SALANOVA, is once you pull it up, it's keeping that bed really clean. Tarps, tremendous tool. One thing that I like about tarps is, like, especially right now, when you're going into the spring, you're gonna have a lot of rain. Sometimes you may have like a week that's dry where maybe you can go ahead and prep 15 or 25 beds. You can get those prepped, whether you're gonna do paper pot or landscape fabric, and you can cover that with the tarp, which will keep it dry. So you can have 25 beds ready, and then over the next several weeks, if you have one day that's clear, instead of having to try to scramble to do bed prep and plant, all you have to do, move the tarp, the bed underneath is dry, and you can just plant right away. So this is a really great tool for the early spring. You can see here this picture, this was done in the early spring. The leaves aren't quite yet formed. This enables us to hit our target planting dates week after week. This is a great tool to help you not miss a week. Of course, this is another great method. We don't use this method hardly ever at all anymore, but I know a lot of folks do, and they have good success with it. All right, so on the SALANOVA, this is kind of our basic plan, and I don't want to read all these dates. You can either screenshot this if you're listening, or if you're listening to this at a later date, you can just pause it. But this is kind of, we have our spring, we have our summer, and then we have our fall, winter plan. And this is our plan. So this isn't really necessarily what maybe work for you, but kind of, if you're close to my area, these are kind of the dates. I have a very much more complicated date that goes every week by week, but this is the basic varieties that we switch to for having that year-round production. We like P200s. It works for us. We have a pretty basic, simple, small greenhouse. You can get by doing much bigger cells, but for us, the P200s is that sweet cell. It's not too small, it's not too big. In the summertime, we like this because we like putting out a smaller transplant. If you put out a big transplant out in the summer, at least in our climate, we found that the leaves tend to wilt, and either they lay on the fabric or even the bare soil. We've found a lot more loss in bigger transplant. So once we started using the P200s, we found overall it just simplified it, and it worked for us. So this is really cheap, and it just saves a lot of space, especially if you're doing, if you need 5,000 plants a day. I mean per week, which is what we're going to be planting this year. This can really save a lot of space if you're hand transplanting. So these are the transplants that size we're looking. In here, this is a lot of paper pots. We like to harden these off. This is kind of a trial. Just kind of wanted to have folks see. This is a mix between SALANOVA and also arugula, baby kale, mustard mix, because in the summertime, it's really difficult to get those crops to germinate. But you can germinate these seeds in your greenhouse in the paper pot. We're using 2-inch cells, and take them out here, and then we let them harden off for a few days before we go out and plant. You can see here, this was probably in August. This section right here just burned up pretty bad that season. But all this here that survived did great in the peak of summer. So if you have the paper pot transplanter and you want arugula and you want those baby greens and you cannot get them to germinate out in your field, think about germinating these in a paper pot in your germination chamber. It's a great way to have consistent production in really hot and humid climates. All right, so let's get to planting. This is really a side-by-side comparison of the paper pot and the hand transplanting. And in terms of time, there is just no comparison. With this paper pot transplanter, let's see if I have a picture on the next one here. Um, this is actually a picture of, I think we're doing arugula on this one here. But it will take two guys approximately, on average, you know, if they're fairly inexperienced, about 30 minutes. So you're looking at 1 man hour per bed of planting by hand. And that's for 800. So we're talking SALANOVA here. So we're talking 800 plants per bed, where literally one guy can plant with a paper pot that same bed in 5 minutes. And it's just, the time saving is, it's really hard to grasp how efficient and fast this tool is. You know, we pay our employees very, very well. And to kind of give a little bit of context, my employee basically ran the production of our farm last year by himself. 1 man, 1 acre. We did a tremendous amount of production on that, even though we lost a lot with flooding. The only way he was able to do that production was with the paper pot. I mean, I just cannot tell folks how efficient this is. It's really unbelievable. The basic downside to the paper pot is really 2 things. One is if your weeds aren't under control and you're in humid, hot climates, you're going to have to cultivate at least twice a week. If you do it twice a week, it does not take that long to cultivate. But if you do not take the time to cultivate that at least once a week, it's going to get out of control. And so again, if you're in sandier soil and water can drain faster, you know, water is not going to retain in those beds. And you know, I've never grown in sandy soil, but what I've been told, and by talking to a lot of farmers, it does seem like farmers who are on sandier soil tend to have a less weed issue. The other downside to paper pot is if you're in really heavy clay soil, you're going to have a lot of backsplash from rain that's going to stick to the lettuce. And wherever the dirt sticks to the bottom of the lettuce, and you know, if you're using overhead irrigation or if it rains, the bottom of those lettuces are not going to dry out as fast, and you're going to see more disease with that backsplash. So anyways, those are the 2 cons, is really having to cultivate, and you're going to have more disease issues possibly. You know, hand transplanting, it's you know, the one thing I did forget to talk about with the paper pot is you can plant standing up, and I just it makes farming very, very enjoyable. But you know, hand transplanting, it's really inexpensive. It's easy to learn. We just hired a new person 2 weeks ago. She's really young. You know, I think she's 18, and you know, first time doing it. You know, her and Judah knocked out 6 beds of hand transplanting in about 3 hours. But again, you know, I have 2 young people on my farm, and for them, they don't mind it as much, but it definitely takes a considerable amount of time. Excuse me. This is my, at the time, 8-year-old daughter hand transplanting. And so the soil is wet. There's actually drip tape underneath it. I don't know if you can see it, but I have that drip tape on, so the bed's wet. This is an early spring. Sometimes we use drip, and you can just push those cells in. Again, to me, this is a young person's job. If you're over 30, you know, this is not a fun job. So once you're done transplanting, doesn't matter if you're doing it by hand or the paper pot, in the summertime, you have to water right away. Most of the time, we're planting before the sun hits the plants. Again, in the summer, our heat index is pretty brutal, and we want to get those roots established as soon as possible. We like to do shade cloth for the first 2 weeks after transplanting. You can leave it on there the whole time, but the problem is, this is SALANOVA here, is that those plants will become leggy, and if you're trying to grow like a red leaf, it's just not going to be as brilliant colored, and it just won't form a really good full head. And so we use this process for paper pot and landscape fabric both. One thing on the landscape fabric I just wanted to kind of touch on is the surface of that landscape fabric is 133 in the sun. And bare soils, like if you're doing paper pot, we found it's about 5 to 10 degrees cooler. On the surface after the shade cloth, it was 117, and underneath that landscape fabric was 81 degrees. What we have found is keeping the soil cool is crucial to helping those roots get established on those transplants. And there's a lot of crazy things involved with that, and we've done a lot of different things that just keeps us going back to, for the first few weeks, you've got to keep that soil cool. So in basic, here is, our basic 10-step. There's a lot of nuances with a lot of this stuff. It's not as simple as it looks here, but this is our basic principles that we really follow. We kind of broke it down to 10 basic steps to really help us get, like this lettuce right here. This is Muir. This was taken in August. And you follow this right here, you can get this out, outlet there. A few harvesting tips that we use for both SALANOVA and head lettuce. We like to harvest before 8 a.m. There's a lot of different methods out there, but what we have found is when you're trying to harvest between 500 to 800 pounds of lettuce in one morning, you got to get started early. So we aim to be done by 8 a.m. Doesn't always happen, but that is our goal. Winter growing. This is something that I think a lot of farmers should be taking advantage of. There's, you can get started with winter growing fairly easy. If you're, really like if you're in zone 8 or 9, you may not even have to do any kind of major structure except maybe row cover for the 1 or 2 nights during the winter that may get the 20s. But in general, most people in the U.S. can keep their production going by just investing in tunnels. And if you can be that grower, that farmer that has production in the wintertime, and maybe you're the only person who has lettuce, and if you're looking for more clients for your spring and summer main season, then making yourself established as that year-round lettuce grower that has production week after week, sleet, freezing, that's really how we've been able to get new clients and keep them. Again, we're kind of in the part of the country they want consistency. If you're not going to be consistent, they're just going to go to Cisco. There's not a big local food movement in West Tennessee. And if you can't be consistent, you're more of a nuisance than them. And so what we found for our, demographic, that consistency is key. So if you have a similar demographic, having tunnels will more than pay for themselves very, very, very quickly. This is kind of, lettuce in some of these tunnels. The biggest pest that we have on our farm on lettuce is going to be aphids. We found that to really control aphids, if you're in an open field or a cat tunnel, we tend to just use like a safer soap or a Molt X. If you're in a high tunnel where you can have screened sides, you can get away with using ladybugs. But most farmers don't have a screened high tunnel yet. And so we found in the wintertime, if you have aphid problems, using safer soap, maybe some Molt-X once a week will help keep these guys at bay. Salad mix. These are just some more other kind of winter varieties that we really like. And irrigation. So just briefly on irrigation. I found that this is so vital to keeping, those roots healthy. You just can't have too much water. And we had some major issues, which we have invested a good bit amount of money this past season. We think we fixed it. But this is something, if you're a new farmer, think about if you get a lot of rain, where does it go? I think last year we lost about $50,000 in crops due to flooding. So it's no small thing. There's drip tape, overhead. We like overhead a lot better than we do drip tape, but sometimes we still use drip tape. For us, we found that automatic water timers is really crucial. And let's kind of get into marketing a little bit because, again, like I said in the beginning, growing is, even though it's difficult, it's still the easy part for us. If you're in an affluent area, maybe near a really big progressive city, this may not be an issue for you. But if you're in rural area, people just don't even know what lettuce looks like, or they just want the cheapest salad mix possible, then understanding where you're going to grow is going to be really, really important. These are all the outlets that we use. We're doing farmers markets. We do a CSA. We have an online shopping store, which has been massive for us. Food hubs, grocery stores, on-farm pickup, food aggregators, and home deliveries. I don't recommend having these many outlets, but we found that our markets are changing rapidly, and we need to have all these. Now, we don't have all these like at one time, but different times of the year, we have to plug in some of these sales outlets. So if you're getting started, or maybe you're on year 5 and you're just like, I've got to ramp this thing up. The farmer's market is dying. It's saturated. What else can I do? So these are some ideas. A lot of these require different packaging, different marketing. But if you're hungry enough, you can sell the product. If you're willing to sell and go anywhere and do anything, there's a lot of opportunity out there. These are just some basic things that we like to think about when we're going to sell. Selling is something that farmers do not like doing. I dislike it. I enjoy talking to people, but I do not enjoy asking people for money. And it's not fun. But it's something that you have to do. And the more you do it, the easier it gets. So that is the end of this, presentation. And this is just a salad dressing that my wife kind of came up with. We love. We have, 6 young children, and we eat a lot of salads. And this is the one dressing that all of our kids will eat, from the youngest to the oldest. It's all whole food, and there's nothing bad in it. And this can change either your salad eating life or possibly the customer that you're selling to. So this has been a huge success for us in our personal life, and as well as a lot of our customers. So I think, okay, Diego, I'll just leave this up. People can write this down, and maybe we can do some Q&A.
Yeah, we'll jump into some Q&A, and I know you also are launching your lettuce course this week. Who's that aimed at? One of the questions that came up from David in here is, where are you located? You're in Selmer, Tennessee. When people look at how you grow lettuce, how much of it is micro to that specific climate, and how much of it is macro? Can this apply to a grower in Maine who deals with heat in August, or is it really the South that you're limited to?
Yeah, I mean, we have people, Canada, Alaska, Africa, Europe, all over. And so, we have, a lot of this is about principles. and there's a lot of things. I went to a conference a few weeks ago. It was in Wisconsin, and they say, folks in Wisconsin and Minnesota don't even grow lettuce in the summer because it's too hot for them. And I think what we're finding is a lot of farmers are finding that the summers are becoming hotter and a lot more humid. And even though their summer may not be as long, they're finding that 8 to 12 week period where they just cannot seem to have the crop. We also have, planting plans and varieties for I think zone 4. So we've really thought about the hot, humid, but also the really, really cold. Like, most northern people, when they see my winter days, just laugh, which I completely understand. And so for that, winter, we have planting dates and we have varieties and we have principles that work for northern climates. I think there is so many nuances with the crop, with disease, with pests, with timing, seed varieties, soil mixes. And then there's just the constant struggle of sales. What packaging do I use? When I go to the grocery store, they don't want to buy this. What are some ideas on packaging? I mean, packaging is a big deal. Like, to give you an example on that packaging, like I had a grocery store who wanted green leaf lettuce. They would only pay maybe 50 cents to 75 cents a head. But I put that head in a 50-cent clamshell, and I was getting $3 a head for it. So, yeah, there's a hassle with the packaging. Yeah, what are we going to do with the plastic? Those are all questions that I think everyone's asking ourselves. But it's those, I think people have that mental gap, like they can grow it, but then they get stuck on selling. And just that whole principle of just think outside the box of don't be stuck. If you're gonna think I'm gonna only sell this loose leaf, I will not do anything else, you're probably gonna have a tough time. But if you're open, then no matter where you're at, there's probably some ideas on how to get you more volume. A lot of this, my goal is I want to see farmers this year, next year, add $1,000 a week to their sales, whether that be salad mix, whether it be, getting that paper pot really dialed in, whether it be head lettuce, whether it be getting that new client, or maybe it's getting through July and August. Things happen quick in the summertime, really, really quick. And there's a lot of things that go south in a hurry.
So when it comes to seed varieties or cultivars of lettuce, summer versus winter, so many varieties to choose from. How do you know where to start, and where would you advise people to start when selecting a winter variety, say cool season, and a hot season or hot and humid season?
I think a good place to start is most seed companies will give you recommendations. They'll tell you these varieties is really good. They're cold hardy. They've been tested up north. Maybe there's 30 of them. So I think, what we've done, and the same thing with summer varieties. Every seed company is going to tell you, hey, this has done well in our summers. Now, maybe they're more north than you, but you can generally start with, in the summer, you're going to get either a summer crisp or a Batavian type lettuce, something that is developed to withstand heat and humidity. And, you can either go with our suggestions, or you can just trial it, see what you like, what your customers like, what you can grow. And then it's the process of elimination.
All right, here's another one that came in. This is
there you go.
From Michael. And I know you've covered this before on a podcast that we did, but it was a long time ago. When covering beds with landscape fabric, you don't just use a 30-inch strip to cover a 30-inch bed. There's wind, and I noticed in the pictures you're covering aisles. Explain your process for laying down landscape fabric.
Yep. So we use a 4-foot and a 10-foot. And so the 4-foot is going to cover the 30-inch bed, and in the two side paths. And then we're going to staple that every 4 feet in the actual path. And again, if we're going to use landscape fabric, we don't want to do any cultivation. And so we don't want to have to do around the edges or on the seam. And then if we're using, if we know we're going to be going through a season of like in beds in 2. So let's say if we're going to be planting 6 beds of head lettuce a week, then we'll just have 3 10-foot strips. And that is doing 2 30-inch beds, the middle path, and the 2 outer paths.
Here's one from Christian. How do you deal with bottom rot on lettuce and manage it?
Yep. So huge issue now. The key is keeping that soil dry, like powder. There's some products you can use out there, a little more complex to get into right now, but the general principle is you need to start your seeds and get your transplants in the fall enough time that it's ready to harvest by whatever date you're trying to aim at. And then, oftentimes in the winters are never like in the summertime, it's consistently hot. We know the day length, it's going to be 28 days almost every single time. In the winter, it's a little bit different. Sometimes you're going to have colder than normal, maybe warmer than normal, maybe it's overcast. And so you could vary some. So what happens is oftentimes the lettuce will mature and then it kind of just hangs out there. And if you go through a season where it's just hanging out there a little bit too long and that soil is wet, you're just a natural process of that lettuce being old in really wet soil. It's going to get bottom rot. Sclerotinia can form, and you can lose a tremendous amount of crop. It can look beautiful one week, and then you get a really humid day, and maybe you're outside, and it's just been soaked for 3 weeks. Man, it's just going to wreak havoc. So the key is keeping it dry. Let me clarify. Keeping it dry once it matures almost to maturity. In the summertime, obviously you can't keep it dry, else it'll die in 4 hours. But in the wintertime, I think that's when most people experience bottom rot.
One of the things people can learn about in your course at lettuceclass.com is soil fertility. One of the things you mentioned early in this presentation was you think a lot of growers overlook or don't take care of soil fertility appropriately. No doubt. Where do you think they're missing? Like, what's going on?
No doubt. So, I think one thing is you can't see it. It's like this hidden problem. So, like, if you have weeds, it's like you can see that. Like, that is chaos, right? And so everyone knows they have to take massive action. Or if their lettuce is bolting, or if pests are destroying the crops, or what's going on. Usually it's very visual and they can see and understand what needs to be done. But underneath the surface, like no one's hidden. It's like this silent enemy lurking in the dark, and it's robbing you of profits and healthy plants and less pests. And there's so many things going on in the soil that we just do not understand. And I think the most common, like even really good growers that I talk to, they have issues, and I'm amazed on how many farmers don't even take a soil test. And they have these problems that I think could be really alleviated. We have a good friend of mine named Ellen Polishchuk, and she did a really good section in the course on soil health, soil fertility, how it works. She's an incredible communicator, very reasonable rates for consulting. That's who I use. I'm not saying that she is the best, but she's the best that I've used. I've spent thousands of dollars on consultants and all their special sauces and just zero results. Where I feel like with her, each year I'm seeing better results year after year. It takes time, to get soil where to the levels that's really, and I think um, just because you can't see a problem doesn't mean that it's not there. And that's why I think it's the number one overlooked issue and enemy behind all farmers, is because you can't see it and it's hard to measure it. And you can take a soil test, but most farmers don't know how to read them properly. And even if they did, it's like, well, what do I buy and how much per bed? And there's so many unknown things, and they just get bogged with all the, and they just stop and they go cultivate or pull both lettuce or whatever it's going to be. So I really do feel like soil health is just incredibly important, and I'm learning every year. I mean, I do not claim to be a master soil scientist, but I do understand each year how important it is to at least address.
Okay, just to close this one out, for people that are interested in learning more, you have your course. Who's that for? Why did you make it, and what do you want people to get out of it?
Yeah, I mean, I made it with myself in mind 10 years ago, knowing that I wanted to grow this product, that I needed to grow it, that my livelihood depended on it. And there was no information. I mean, all I was told was that it was impossible. You can't do it. And after seeing what it's done to my farm, and it's enabled me to hire really competent, capable employees. I'm building a team from it and making a very good living. Not just growing lettuce, but lettuce is the foundation. And my goal is to help other farmers do the same thing. And I just feel like so many of the farmers that reach out to me via consulting or emails, messages, is cash all like, it's one thing if you're going to have a backyard gardener, but as soon as anybody has a mission to make a living, I think, not everybody has a San Francisco, New York, Portland farmers market. A lot of farmers markets are very challenging to get into. But everybody recognizes that, lettuce is just very, very popular. It's the easiest crop to get down, but yet a lot of farmers struggle to get it down. And I really made this for myself 10 years ago. This is what I would have wanted to have seen. And my goal is that, if I can help 10, 50, 100 farmers improve their bottom dollar, give them more time, help them hire an employee so they can spend more time with their kids, I would be thrilled. So it's and to be clear, it's not a whole farm course. It's very narrow in one crop, that I think more people should be growing more of this crop on a consistent basis, and they're just not.